Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to introduce you to today's presenter, Max Signorelli, Principal Analyst, Media and Entertainment at OMDIA, who are, of course, based in London. He will be presenting today on the top trends to watch throughout 2023. We're scheduled for 30 minutes, which includes time for a Q&A session at the end. So please do get involved and post your questions by using the Q&A button, and Max will answer them at the end. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted on the members only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, please email info@ctameurope.com for more details. Members have access to a monthly webinar and also webinars and monthly podcasts from CTAM US. And we have an annual symposium, which is due to take place in autumn. I'll also follow up by email to you this week about our annual executive management program, which we are holding at INSEAD in a couple of weeks. And then we'll open registration for our class of 24, which will be in March next year. Max and OMDIA will receive the registration for today's webinar and may follow up with their own news separately. So I will take myself off screen now. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll hand you over to Max. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Great to be back with CTAM again for another webinar. Hello, everyone online. My name is Max Signorelli. As I've been so adequately introduced already, I'm from OMDIA. I'm the consumer research lead in the media and entertainment sector of research for OMDIA. And today I'm going to be bringing you some summary and some highlights from our 2023 Trends to Watch report series that we put out across all various topics in the media and entertainment pillar as part of OMDIA's research. Please do get in touch with me via any of the links on screen, and I'll be around afterwards to answer questions. And please do message me afterwards with any other questions or indeed to access the deck from today's presentation. Without further ado, let's jump into who we are. For those of you who are unaware, we are OMDIA, and as I said before, we are connecting the dots across all various bits of media entertainment, but as well also technology, service providers, etc., etc. Today, I'm coming at you from the TV and video and advertising pillars of research. There are around 30 of us doing this research into all different kinds of media entertainment, looking at different regions of the world, global coverage, global teams, and indeed global coverage of these operators in this space, and indeed all the big business models happening in this space. And everything you see here has an influence in some way or another on the research that we're doing. So we're covering everything from every angle. But for what's going on today. So I'm going to take you through three major sections today. Firstly, I'm going to start looking at the content on these video services, the services themselves, and indeed the devices this content is being consumed on. I couldn't do a 2023 Trends to Watch presentation without mentioning advertising. We have mentioned this from so many different angles at OMDIA, and I want to give you a bit of an overview of the ways we are looking at it in 2023. And equally speaking, I couldn't do one of these presentations without looking at partnerships as well as consolidation in the market, how operators are working with each other, or in some cases, maybe absorbing each other, or working in other ways with each other in a new and rapidly evolving market space. So I want to get into each of these topics, but I want to start with a bit of an introduction to sort of set the scene. This is a quote from one of my colleagues, Tony Gerson, who wrote the TV online video super themes Trends to Watch report. And his quote stuck with me quite strongly because it's really a good overview of what everyone is doing in this space. They're trying to maximize reach, and by maximizing reach, maximize revenue. And that's regardless of business model. And you can see that in the ways that so many operators are engaging with their consumers in so many different business models, be that through video, or be that through other sectors of media entertainment, be that through games, be that through music, be that through cinema. There's lots of different ways they've been doing this for a long time, but more and more these days, these business models and these sectors are blending together much more and providing a much more holistic view of the media entertainment landscape and people's media and entertainment portfolios, and by extension, their spending on said media entertainment portfolios. Now, what we have to do at this point is really give the analysts studying this market credit, because it's very difficult to predict the future these days. Things can change at the drop of the hat. We've seen in the last few years, we've seen so many once in a lifetime events that we figured it would be unreasonable to account for these in our forecasts. And so you'll see us having to compensate for all kinds of things these days. Various crises, war in Europe, war around the world, pandemics, cost of living crises around in various countries around the world. And that looks very different in different countries as well. And a lot of this can be socio-political as well. So we have to sort of consider all these things together with how the media entertainment landscape is evolving. And at this point in time, it's evolving so rapidly. It's very difficult to keep on top of that. Nevertheless, we do our best, and I'm going to bring you some of that today. So let's again look at this from the top level. And again, we cover everything across the board in OMDIA here. So what we're looking at here are growth rates for media entertainment revenue across the world. And what we're seeing is that we're seeing some particularly strong growth from online video. And perhaps unsurprisingly, that's why I'm here coming at you from the TV and video and advertising side of things, because that's where a lot of growth is coming from in this space. Nevertheless, we are also seeing significant growth in other sectors as well. Game spend is up. Cinema revenue is recovering nicely after the pandemic, or after the peak of the pandemic, I should say. And that's generating lots more revenue across the media entertainment landscape. And this is really important to keep in mind because lots of operators are looking at lots of these spaces for what they're going to do with their business strategy moving forward. But there's a lot of money on the table here, and there's a lot more money, clearly, to come. And some of the ways that they're approaching these opportunities as well, I've talked already a little bit about advertising, which I'm going to get into a bit more later, and also looking at things like content bundles and aggregation. We see lots of opportunities there in terms of people working together and trying to approach their consumers in new ways, but there are also challenges to doing these things. We've heard a lot about new digital worlds, new digital currencies, new digital assets, these kind of new ways of engaging with consumers. They should be considered, but should be approached with caution because there's still a long way for some of these things to go. So make it part of your strategy, but make it part of something that you are thinking about in addition to these here and now techniques here. And this idea of also trying to maintain the status quo, maintaining revenue, there's lots of erosion coming. There's lots of ways that revenue is being eroded from lots of different angles by lots of different newcomers and established operators in these spaces. So there's a serious challenge there for maintaining that revenue while approaching these new opportunities in new ways. So do keep all that in mind as I go through the rest of the slides here. So we're going to start with the crossroads of content, services, and devices, because that is the key part of this as we move forward. So I want to start by looking at something from one of our intelligence services, one of our spotlight services, a consumer research that we do, looking at how consumers are engaging with these media services. And what we see is that over time, the viewers have become increasingly content hungry, but at the same time, and especially nowadays, they've become increasingly volatile as well. They are much more likely to be dropping out of different services, using different services at different amounts, weekly, daily, monthly users. It all fluctuates quite rapidly. And you can see the different sectors between which they are saying is their preference for this content. And while we saw in one of the previous slides, pay TV revenue is falling, and there is indeed an issue with cord cutting in a lot of major markets, it is not entirely universal. And where pay TV still stands, it is still a very strong proposition for their consumers. People like their pay TV subscriptions. They are willing to continue paying for them, provided they feel like they're getting good value for money out of it. And a lot of that value comes from the content, and increasingly these days, a lot of that value comes from the partners that they are working with in that space to ensure that the pay TV operator is still the premium aggregator of all content. And that is increasingly extending beyond video content as well. Lots of people looking at different angles in here as well, and new ways of engaging with their consumers much more holistically. But the point here is that there's a lot of jump between different sectors, and people use different sectors, different amounts for different things, but that is also rapidly evolving. And one of the ways we see that is by flicking over to a different way of people looking at their video services. That is, what genres of content people are using these video services for. Now, in the past, across pretty much all markets we sample, at least in our survey, we see that Netflix is one of the major content providers across all genres, excluding sport, which is perhaps unsurprising. Netflix is one of the leaders in this space. It's one of the leading video services in each market that it's now in. And so perhaps it's not surprising that they have taken that top space. What is interesting moving forward is that the share of those Netflix respondents that say that Netflix is their best service for a given piece of content is falling. And it's falling it's falling quite noticeably with time, largely to the benefit of other secondary, tertiary video platforms in these markets. This idea of thinking of Netflix or Amazon or increasingly Disney Plus these days as the basal services is a concept that's being increasingly challenged. And this idea that consumers are now taking many more video services than they ever were before, and so they have to compensate for that. So there's a lot of other video services out there, and a lot of other video services are taking their positions as top video providers for top content. I couldn't go into this section anymore without starting to look at this from the device perspective, because a lot of the consumer experience of content is tied to that device platform. Now, what we're seeing here is devices that are used on the primary TV to access video content and how that differs by age group across these markets. And what we see is that, again, to the credit of pay TV, the set-top box is certainly not a dead platform. It is very much an ongoingly used platform, significantly used platform on their primary TV. And again, that correlates quite well with the strength of pay TV's offering still in some of these markets. Again, it's on the decline, but not so much as compared to things like the growth in online video. The two can coexist, and there is a way of these operators working together to provide this content in the way that consumers want to access it. That said, there is still something seriously to be said for smart TVs. And I'm going to get into talking about these device platforms a little bit more later on. But these smart TV platforms are a serious major competitor now in this space. They are no longer just a place where content is accessed. They are the content providers as well. They are aggregating everything together. And if anything, they are the biggest competition to pay TV in this space moving forward. Nevertheless, though, as well, depending on which age group you're looking to target, they get their content in different ways from different platforms. The digital media adapter is still a very strong way of gathering this content, even on the primary TV, which may indeed be a smart TV. Games consoles, where they're used as well, tend to be quite highly used, admittedly lower penetration across these markets, but nevertheless, still something that is adequately used as a content platform. And you can't forget about your website, because there are still people using those laptop PCs connected wirelessly or wired to their TV sets. But increasingly, this primary TV space also has to contest with secondary screen viewing. This idea of the casual viewing experience is something that's really important when we start talking about things like FAST, and when we start talking about how people are actually realistically engaging with their video services. And this idea here that these second screens are providing a new opportunity, or in that sense, or a sense, another pathway to access your consumer. And again, this is something that heavily skews younger. We see that the younger age groups, those under the age of 35, are significantly more likely to use their phone to do things other than video content while they're watching TV, and even to watch additional video content while they're watching TV as well. So this idea that people are only sitting down to watch the big hits is certainly not true. Most of the time, people are going there for a casual viewing experience at the end of a work day, at the end of events, in the evenings, in the mornings, wherever it may be, still looking for this casual viewing experience. And when we look at all these devices together, we've looked at smart TVs, we've looked at DMAs, we're looking at mobiles and tablets to an extent here as well. It's no surprise then that we're still seeing these device platforms grow, and we're going to see addressable devices breach the 9 billion mark worldwide in 2023 and the 10 billion mark in 2027. And you can see here that we're still seeing a plethora of smartphones, but also PCs are still there. Smart TVs are one of the ones that's growing quite significantly as well. This idea that there's increasingly a pivot between the smart TV and the non-smart TV. There's still a decent number of non-smart TVs out there. And as these replacement cycles keep on going, we're going to see increasing penetration of these smart TV sets. But indeed, that's also where things like the digital media adapter, the games console, other peripheral devices can contribute to consumer connectivity via their primary TV set. But that is something that's phasing out. But there's still plenty of addressable devices out there, addressable to all different kinds of content. And for those of you interested in VR headsets, there is a forecast there for that. It's relatively dwarfed, I should say, but nevertheless, that number is also growing and also is a new portal for new kinds of interactivity with their customers. But even here, looking at the device platforms, there's a reaction to the cost of living crisis. When inflation is this high and we're seeing that inflation passed on to the cost of devices, those life cycles I was previously talking about are likely to extend further. And it means that people are going to be holding on to these older devices for longer. And so these upgrades that people may want to take advantage of may roll out less rapidly than they have done, relatively speaking, in the past, because people are increasingly price conscious. Devices are a significant financial investment, certainly compared to their video service that they're using, which perhaps are still compatible with their old devices. So it's not entirely about something new is going to come out, it's going to hit right away. It's something that will phase out gradually with time. But nevertheless, these device platforms are all still growing. They're still paying more of them. And there's lots of interplay here as well between the different brands in the device space, as well as the service space. So now I want to jump quickly into advertising and want to look at this because, again, I can't do this without looking at advertising in some way, shape, or form. So the big battle is for the consumer. It's the price of a piece of content versus the time they spend engaging with it, effectively trading off the value of content for time spent watching advertisements. Now, these different tolerances look very different by market. There are those that say that price is important to their services, but also that accessing ad-free content is important to them. Here, really, you have to consider the differential between those people that are more likely to pay less for their services in exchange for a bit of advertisements. That's where we start talking about things like hybrid business models, or indeed those that will not pay any more for their subscription service portfolio and will turn to advertising funded alternatives, pure advertising funded alternatives instead, and how that can seriously change the way they're interacting with their media entertainment portfolio. And again, I couldn't do this presentation without a brief mention of FAST. Now, we've seen these slides already. These slides have been going around from the OMDIA side of things, looking at one of the major FAST providers in this space, Samsung TV Plus. Again, a device manufacturer really entering this space. And it's really important to consider these device platforms and indeed to consider FAST as part of the consumer viewing experience. That said, one has to consider FAST's place with respect to everything else. Our research would imply that a lot of FAST services tend to be used more frequently on a weekly basis or a monthly basis compared to a daily basis. The daily basis is still largely held by big platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Netflix, and indeed pay TV if it is available in that household. So in terms of real usage rates, FAST is here, but it doesn't really hold that same top position as a lot of these other players in this space have. And that, I feel, is largely tied to this idea of the casual viewing experience again, this idea that it's here to provide something when I need it, but it isn't my go-to place for looking for given pieces of content. Nevertheless, when it comes to advertising, this FAST revenue is ones that are growing the fastest, and it's growing in quite a lot of different places around the world, not just in the US, also in other markets around the world. So it's definitely something worth tracking and worth following. But as I've already mentioned about hybrid, ads on SVOD will seriously change the game here. We've already seen the unthinkable, where Netflix has pivoted into advertisements, and we are starting to see the results of that. Now, that is an extremely volatile space. There's a lot of intentions there, and we have to see whether it is executed correctly. So far, Netflix's foray into advertising has felt a little bit tempered, and so there's still a lot more that can be done in that space to really push this idea of consumers switching from premium tiers to hybrid advertising tiers. And this is something that, again, is exemplified largely by the US. So we don't want to say that that's the future for everywhere, or at least not right away. Places like YouTube are typically, places like Europe are typically much stickier when it comes to the differential between their premium content and their advertising supported content. And that's largely down to the portfolio of other providers in that space, public service broadcasters taking a clear share of online advertising markets, and premium subscriptions like Netflix and Amazon, and nowadays Disney Plus, HBO, Paramount Plus, which are really setting the standard for premium video content in these spaces. Nevertheless, online video advertising is a serious market growth space here, and we're going to start seeing a lot of people engaging with this in addition to their premium video revenue streams in order to capitalize on these consumers and to seriously push the boundaries of what's possible in markets that may otherwise have been considered saturated. This is where some new revenue opportunities are certainly going to be found. But in this space as well, we have social video. And that's something that I also can't get away without talking about today. The growth of TikTok has been something which is relatively profound. And again, it's a fairly universal constant when we look at the consumers that are using said video service. For younger consumers in particular, it ranks among their highest used video services in markets, beating out in occasion the likes of Netflix or indeed pay TV, whatever else it may be. It's a seriously potent platform, and all of these social video platforms will have a serious space moving forward in developing advertising revenue in this space and pushing the consumer into new forms of engagement with their video content. It's definitely not something that can be ignored. We've been hammering this home for a long time. It's a hugely prevalent platform. It's a hugely popular platform. The format of short form content, short form rapid access content is something that the consumers are going to. And indeed, it's something that the younger generations, those around 18 to 24, Gen Z, they will maintain this habit as they move forward into other age groups. We seriously think that these people will hold on to these habits as they enter the space where they may be more likely to subscribe to things like premium pay TV or premium SVOD. We seriously think they'll hold on to this while they move forward. And as a result of that, operators in that space, be they telcos, be they pay TV operators, be they SVOD services, whatever it may be, will need to form an increasingly deep engagement with these social media platforms. These are some results from our annual viewing time report that we do, that we've been running for a very long time now. And this is really how we predict the viewing time to change across these different formats. Back when linear TV was king, and it took 86% of total viewing time across markets that we sampled, and social media only took 2%. Now that's 22%. And these other platforms, including things like long form subscription video on demand, other online video support here, it's really eroded this linear TV time of viewing. Nevertheless, there is space where there's coming back, looking at fast services again to bring back this linear TV viewing experience, to remove the element of choice for these consumers, to give them something more easy to watch. But again, that's seriously on the go and developing. So now we get into the final section here, looking at partnerships, consolidations, and the new frontiers, not to put it too boldly. But one of the things, again, one of the headlines from one of our Trends to Watch reports that I thought was really interesting, this idea of B2B to C is the new B2C. This idea that a lot of these SVOD subscriptions moving forward, where they've typically gone it alone, will increasingly rely on their partnerships with things like pay TV operators, broadband providers, mobile providers, to provide their services in these saturated markets. This idea of getting the bundle, the great value for money, especially now that money is being squeezed a bit more, is increasingly important, and increasingly important in the face of advertising services as well. It's just something that they have to compete against because these platforms are still omnipresent and there are only so many hours in the day. And one seriously has to work out then where their service fits into this consumer time spent with their media content, and the avenues with which they're getting that, and the avenues with which they're paying for that, and how that can be beneficial. That can be beneficial to both parties in this space, to the partner and to the service that's being operated on this space. But again, you can see this share is very different by region, and sometimes this is absolutely necessary for new services to gain ground quickly and to gain significant ground in this space versus competition that may have been doing it for a lot longer. But we talked a little about these partners there, but the studios, the people making this content, need these partners too. Again, in this world of competition, they're going to be butting heads with each other in a lot of these spaces, and something like that is typically inevitable. But this idea that they were going to go all in with their D2C platform, some of these studios, for some operators, Walt Disney Co. has gone, very much into it. We're seeing that it's going to get around, half. We're seeing it's currently getting around half of its video revenue. When you look at linear TV and D2C together, we're seeing that it's getting about half its revenue from the D2C platforms. And so there's clearly significant investment in this place, but Disney has been in the news a lot of times to look at this in different ways. Other providers are entering this space, but the ramp up is slow and ongoing. And again, this is something that has to be considered on a worldwide basis as well. Very different from the US to Europe to Asia, everywhere else. It's very, very different. Now, that's not to say that they won't continue to invest in this space, but we've seen how volatile these operators can be, and we've seen some serious shakeups in recent times. So it'll be interesting to see how this continues moving forward. And now this is just putting some names on the board here. I'm not suggesting anything is going to happen in this space, although we think something will happen. And when you look at how big some of these operators are by their market cap, you see that there is still space where these big video operators, these big tech platforms, these big device platforms, there's still room for merger and acquisition activity. And again, that can be between these big platforms. These can be between content providers, content delivery systems. There's all kinds of partnerships that can be done in this space. And I'm not suggesting that any of these names are going to do anything with any of these other names. I'm not here to suggest anything like that. What I am saying is that there are still companies out there with the money to absorb potentially some smaller brands, or to potentially use these other avenues that they have to engage their consumers to target the consumer in a new way. Again, thinking about the full media entertainment portfolio here. Think about their device platform, think about how much time they spend with games, how much they spend on music, how much they spend on video, piecing all that together to create one big media and entertainment empire. And one of the ways we've seen this is people like Apple investing into sport. And we've seen them, investing in things like the MLS and the MLB. There is space for new content types and new strategies in terms of just the content on these video services to take these platforms to new heights. And that will really change the way Apple is engaging with the market. Again, assuming that it works. There is something to be said for sport in particular, where it has to be delivered in a strong and reliable way to their super fans. But nevertheless, it is a great potential for a differentiator, especially considering the way the rights work with these things. It can be a great differentiator for these platforms. But again, that is a very by market basis, requires a lot of effort, can require a lot of partnerships to work out and iron out the details here to create something that makes money for all parties involved. Again, that's what everyone's going for here. And so it has to be worked out in a more consistent way. That said, all this consolidation isn't just happening on the big service provider platform. We're looking at this from the devices platform again, where we've got things like, on PCs, where basically it's a choice between Windows and Mac, but potentially also Google in there as well, or on mobiles where you're potentially just choosing between Android or iOS for most markets. With TVs, you still have a very fragmented ecosystem. And so there's an idea here that there may be some consolidation in this space as well, or again, these operators working in different ways to promote their platforms or to license out their platforms to other people. And so there's still some consolidation to be done here as well, we think. So again, look at this from all perspectives, from video services, from devices, from different content streams. There's lots of different ways this can all work together. So we're reaching the end here. So I just want to give you these key takeaways to go with. Again, one of the things I feel like I've highlighted in almost every single one of these that I've done is that no one can go it alone. These partnerships are necessary, and they're increasingly necessary, especially as the consumer is more fragmented and going to lots of different places for lots of different kinds of content. Investment still has to be made in content. And as we've said, sports can be a particularly strong differentiator there. Device manufacturers increasingly getting involved in the media entertainment space. Really important to consider them alongside all the other platforms. Again, things like video, things like social, everything else as well. Merger and acquisition activity still ongoing, still plenty of potential there. We'll have to see which players are interacting with who there. And again, got to bring up, social platforms, TikTok, YouTube, Meta, still all very relevant platforms for distribution of content. And again, we've talked a lot about advertising, but it isn't always to the detriment of paid video. Paid video is still here. Paid video has run into some issues, but paid video is still here and still a major platform and still has significant growth potential over the next few years. But a lot of that could be supported by advertising, either through separate advertising video services or also as hybrid strategies as well, which we're seeing a lot of players increasingly move into as well. So there's lots to do, lots going on in 2023. We're almost 2 months into 2023 already. So we're kicking a lot of these things into high gear as we enter Q2, Q3 and onwards. And that takes us to the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for listening. All contact details on screen. And I believe we have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Let's go for it. Thank you, Max. Fascinating facts and figures, as always. Funky graphs there as well, which we all like. So we have got a couple of good questions here. So first off, what's your view on the cross-sector opportunities for media and entertainment in 2023, videos and movies, games and TV, music, etc.?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, there's lots of different ways these operators are looking to engage with their consumers. And one of the things we're starting to see a little bit more, and has been exemplified quite recently by things like The Last of Us, is this idea that there's a lot of very strong IP in different sectors that can be utilized across different windows. We were seeing this to an extent when cinema and TV has always been a natural follow-on from each other, but there's lots of different ways it can be approached as well. All these TV shows have music associated with them. A lot of IP has even been turned into games or has come from games, subsequently come from books. We shouldn't be forgetting books in all this. Written media is still out there, and it's a great IP source for a lot of these things. But games are very interactive content and have very dedicated fan bases. And there is a lot of potential for some really good content or storytelling based on these things. And so we're going to start seeing a lot of people engaging with this in different ways, and that's not just down to the studios involved getting involved in this content, depending on what IP they work with or what IP they own. There's a lot of cross potential opportunities there, especially when we start considering things on a platform level, be we looking at devices or the metaverse or whatever else these big companies are looking to get involved with.
Excellent. And another one here, what does the contribution of FAST revenue look like to the overall growth in advertising revenue? That's a good question.
Yes. So I've really only had time to touch on FAST today, but we saw before the growth in advertising revenue, and we see how it's going to grow significantly around the world across all markets between now and 2023, and indeed onwards to 2027. FAST, as I've said, is a part of that. It's not going to be the lion's share of that by 2027. We've forecasted for it to be about $12 billion in revenue in 2027, which compared to a market worth hundreds and hundreds of billions is not taking everything away. But I still think it has that place for being effectively almost a basal service or something for casual viewing. But I think it also says something for this idea of consumers engaging with content via their smart TVs or their connected TVs. And that is a big opportunity for people in advertising revenues, looking at it from, again, a plethora of services, especially as we see people like smart TV manufacturers getting into gaming spaces, connecting with things like cloud gaming as well. That again goes back to this idea of a holistic media entertainment ecosystem that spans different content types and spans different kinds of engagement.
Yeah, excellent. And then we have another one here. Oh, we have a comment first from your colleague, Maria Hagueta. Congratulations, great deck. Then we have one here. The two largest US cable operators, Comcast and Charter, have created the Xumo, and I apologize if that's not how you say it, joint venture to not concede their large screen ownership to the smart TV's entrance. Yet that JV did not even make your slide. How do you think these MSOs will succeed or fail versus the smart TV manufacturers?
It's a great point, and it's a great example of something that I've kind of been talking about for a lot of these slides, this idea of partnerships and coming up in the face of big smart TV manufacturers. I don't think there's any way of denying the prevalence of these smart TV manufacturers. We saw the share that Samsung have of the connected market, LG, and that's pretty consistent, again, in a lot of different markets. I think that to encroach on, or not to encroach on their space, but to adequately compete with them in this space, the partnership has to be very considered and again hit a lot of different angles and provide effectively a USP. A lot of these TV systems are the same, and a lot of preference for these systems comes down to how they function, how they work, whether people like certain operating systems or not. I think that there's still potential in these partnerships to bring something new to the table. In Europe, we've seen things like Sky and putting out Sky Glass and rolling that out in Europe, but also rolling that out in other markets via partnerships with operators in those spaces as well. I think there's something to be said for that, but it's not just a matter of doing it and it will work. It's doing it and following it up with consistent platform growth and integration of new features as and when they happen. And again, I've talked a lot about gaming here in the context of, gaming IP being good for video, but gaming also as a part of people's use of time. And it's this idea that you've got to hit the right consumer group with the right offering for the right amount of time as well to be valuable to the consumer, but also to, at the end of the day, attract the partners that you're looking to bring into the platform. And if that's from an advertising perspective, obviously the amount of time and the number of eyeballs you keep there is really important. Yeah. And that comes down to a whole different kind of factors: content, quality of platform, all kinds of things there.
That's another webinar you can do for us another time. Yeah, don't miss a trick. Right. Thank you, Max. Have we got any more questions? No, we haven't. So if anybody has any more questions to ask, Max's email address is on the screen there, or you can also follow up with info@ctameurope.com. So thank you very much. Oh, and if anybody wants a copy of the slides, if you can email Max directly and he'll send them out to you as well. So thank you all. Thanks, Max, very much for that. It was fascinating. And thanks everybody for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the week. See you soon.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.